2019, under the ground, labyrinths with a huge number of different structures suddenly appear. They have come to be called dungeons. Hundreds of floors and unexplored areas that several countries have sent expeditions to explore. Dungeons hold not only treasures, but are also teeming with monsters. It is also revealed that there are levels, skills, and magic in dungeons. Quite like in the games, an extraordinary and exciting underworld. A great era of explorers began, with all nations competing for resources and treasure. These were taken up by specialists from private organizations, commissioned by governments, called adventurers. In 2024, the Dungeons Act allowed anyone to explore. 2028. Takagi Kaito explores the ground floor of the dungeon near his home. He is a high school student with no success, yet possesses a great adventurous spirit. The guy abruptly turned around and sprayed his weapon against the slime following him. That weapon turned out to be bug spray. Takagi stopped fearing the enemy after learning about its weakness. Meanwhile, the slime was beginning to gurgle. And suddenly it snapped and began bouncing on the walls. Ended up smashing into the guy's stomach with all its might. As he squirmed in pain, the slime shrank more and more and glowed brightly. It took Kaito 3 hours to defeat 3 slimes. The hero reached for the pebble left by the monster. It is a kind of his heart. The stone is also called a magic shard, which could then be sold at the guild office. Slimes are very weak monsters and therefore only cost 500 yen apiece. Takagi pondered that it was possible to earn more with a regular job as well. And then he noticed that the glow was getting stronger. A screen appeared in front of the hero and level 2 in his personal chart changed to level 3. Kaito could not believe his eyes. He became an adventurer at the age of 15. 2 years had passed since then. Even though still on the wooden level, but the boy dreams that one day he will be able to rise. The Adventurers Association created the hierarchy of adventurers. The lowest rank is Tree, with Ori Hulk at the top. Rank is determined by your achievements. You can obtain a license from the age of 15 by taking courses and paying 100,000 yen. Takagi recalls his childhood, his girlfriend, and his confession of his dream of becoming an Ori Hulk rank adventurer. Now the boy is determined. It's time to challenge the first floor. The first floor is inhabited by goblins and other monsters. Kaito decided to explore everything first and then already make a plan of action. As soon as he descended, he saw 2 monsters in front of him. Kaito didn't know if he could handle the monsters alone. The situation frightened him, but at the same time he realized that the stairs were quite close and at any time, he would be able to escape, which in turn already calmed him down a little and gave him the determination to fight. Behind the back of the goblins are a pile of backpacks, equipment, and even various clothes. One of the monsters was chewing gum, another was smoking a cigar. The hero realized that the camp was set up so close to the entrance for a reason. It was a trap for adventurous newcomers. Sweating and breathing heavily, Kaito convinced himself not to retreat. With faith to start his legend, he threw himself at his enemies, but immediately fell under the blow. With squeals and shouts, the goblins ran up to the defeated hero. Realizing their strength, feeling intense pain and fear, Takagi asked them to stop. One of the monsters found his wooden sword. Seeing this, the second monster tried to snatch the loot. Kaito realized that the fight was a chance for salvation. Crawling up the stairs, the guy lamented that he had underestimated the level of the first floor. Everyone had told him that goblins were only weak mobs in any game. Only brazen liars could say that, for he had practically died there. Kaito stood in a daze and thought that the failure count had opened up again. A center filled with adventurers, where anyone can pick up a quest or post their own, also called the Dungeon Guild. There's an information center and a team search center. In addition to getting information, you can sell the magic shards you have collected. Here's one of the adventurers boasting that he has reached the iron rank. That means he can now descend to the 5th floor. The guy admitted that the 4th floor had given him a lot of trouble, but he wasn't going to slow down. The girl sitting next to him quipped that he had achieved all this not without her help. And he lovingly apologizes. Looking at the couple, the third of the company thinks about also finding a nice girl rather than hanging out with thugs. On another couch nearby sat a seriously traumatized guy. The company began to whisper excitedly. He was clearly fighting not for life but for death. The trio surmised that this must be a professional adventurer who had descended into the deepest depths of the dungeon. But the stranger turned out to be Takagi Kaito, a mere wood-rank novice beaten on the 1st floor. The company in their speculation had already promoted him to gold rank, assigning him the conquest of the 20th and even 30th floor. Kaido, on the other hand, had lost to ordinary goblins, though they were certainly quite intelligent and very strong. The girl had already expressed for the hero to help with conquering the 5th level. And Kaido, upon hearing that, mentally begs her not to do so, because an ordinary high school student would definitely not be able to live up to their expectations. Only the girl called out to Takagi as a voice came out, asking her to come to the counter 45 number. It's Kaido's room. Being startled and stressed by the whispers, he happily snapped out of his seat. Waddling to the counter, the guy suddenly realized that he had been fighting alone in the dungeons all these 2 years, while others were having fun in their groups. A tear of sadness welled up in his eyes. Takagi, deeply saddened, decided to sell the shards faster and go home. The lady in the reception window appeared to be quite frankly dressed, strongly emphasizing her virtues, and also drew attention to the fact that the hero must have had a hard time. Her name is Hitsugaya, a staff member of the Adventurers Research Guild. The girl reported that they had received the report and was glad that Kaido had returned alive. Hitsugaya reprimanded the guy for still not finding a team. Without support on the 1st floor, he can't do well. And Takagi stared mesmerized at the girl's chest and admired her kindness. A loud shout awakened Kaido from his reverie. He explained that he was acting alone because there was no one to team up with. The staff member insisted that it was very dangerous to continue alone and one should at least use servants. Guy clarified whether she meant summoning warriors or monsters. Hitsugaya said that if a small chance came up and a rare card fell out of a monster, she would allow herself to summon a servant inside the dungeon. There are different summoning cards. Some can summon a goblin or a dragon. And there are very rare god cards that can be used to summon an angel-like creature. Only 100 of these cards have been found, and very little is known about them. Takagi immediately wondered if he could continue fighting alone if he found even one such. The answer was in the affirmative. But Hitsugaya warned that if the guy wanted to put the map up for auction, he could sell it for about 1 billion yen. Although no one had sold it yet. The information really shocked the guy. For his own shards at the checkout, they handed over 35. For his own shards at the checkout, that was his payment for a month of slime hunting. Well, it looks like he's on the plus side this month too. But Kaido was worried about his pipe dream of getting an S-rank servant card. The guy thanked for the money and promised to come back once he collected more magic shards. He was about to leave when suddenly Hitsugaya called out to him. Smiling sweetly, she asked him not to despair. Doing things at your own pace is normal. Suddenly, the same guy and girl appeared. The girl was pointing at Kaido, but she didn't have time to finish her sentence. The guy ran away despite his injuries. Takagi lay at home in his bed and studied the chance of an item appearing after monsters died. All but the slimes had an approximate 1 to 3. Slimes, as it turned out, gave nothing. Items for potions or rare metals drop out most often. Also a magic orb that allows you to use a magic skill. Also an obscure jelly that increases your ability points. Rare items have an even lower chance of falling out. It seems that there was no information about the rare cards Miss Hitsugaya shared with him online. Kaido thought about how he wouldn't want a goblin as a servant, but would very much not mind if it was a dragon capable of defeating a demon lord, and immediately berated himself for being foolish. Right now he needed to sleep and focus on his recovery. 3 months had passed. Takagi sat lurking, stalking a slime jumping nearby. Abruptly coming out of his hiding place, the boy aimed his bug spray at the enemy. It was the second one defeated, allowing Kaido to make sure he was fully healed. Clenching his fist, the guy promised himself not to be so careless from now on and continue killing slimes on the ground floor. Just as suddenly, footsteps were heard. Turning around, he saw feet emerge from the shadows. It was a slime on legs. Takagi couldn't believe his eyes. In all his 2 years of hunting, he had never seen one of these before. Before he knew it, the slime was running away. Why is he so fast? The slime was running around Kaido, creating a whirlwind. There was no way the hero could hit the slime. He jumped back and gave a sudden blow to the guy's stomach. Under the blows, in unsuccessful attempts to catch the enemy, Kaido dreamed of slowing him down for a second. But the slime only gained more speed. Takagi realized that if this continued, he would lose the fight. In a frenzy, Kaido pulled out a second canister. He began to spray insect repellent around him, creating a toxic cloud. The technique worked. Slime was hit by the attack and fell, shuddering. The guy cheered and laughed happily, but immediately started coughing. Getting hit by his own attack was still a weakness of the technique. Kaido noticed the glow and turned around. But it wasn't a magic shard. In front of him, the servant card was glowing. He was very surprised, because slimes don't have a chance of dropping an item. Looking closer, the hero saw the image of an angel and the inscription Sylphie on the card. Was it her name? Kaido didn't know the language, but inexplicably understood it. He felt intense excitement because his gut told him it was an SSR level map. The guy remembered the value of the item and shouted his happiness to the entire dungeon. That day, the guild received several reports of a suspicious person running around the ground floor of the dungeon and making strange screams. The altar room of the ground floor. Kaido sat in the hall on a dais in the lotus posture, trying to calm himself down. He insinuated to himself that until he knew how rare the card was, it was premature to rejoice. Hitsugai's words ran through his mind. Many people hide the fact that they have a rare card. And to go to the guild and ask for an appraisal of the card would mean that people would know that he possessed it. And if the card is actually so rare, many people will want to take it for themselves. Kaido looked at the description of Sylphie on the screen. She belongs to the Valkyrie race, and if the information is to be believed, she is indeed a servant of the divine class. The hero admires her beauty, besides he always dreamed of having an older brother or sister. In his dreams, Kaido already imagined Sylphia cradling him. But if he summoned her, would she be willing to serve him? The boy realized that he was facing a dilemma. The servant can only be used by the person who summoned it first, and the value of the card will drop. And if he wanted all the money, he shouldn't summon Sylphia. Kaido thought about the 1 billion yen and mentally pictured Sylphie's image. The hero picked up the card and said the summoning. The choice had been made. Kaido didn't become an adventurer for ulterior motives or money, he followed a dream. He had always wanted to see the many wonders of the dungeon. Not seeing a servant nearby, Kaido wondered if he had made the right call. Needing to hold the card correctly and call out a name. And then he saw the demigoddess looking down at him from above. She was huge. Not only her, but her breasts, which the hero immediately noticed. A flash of light blinded Kaido. When he opened his eyes, the servant in front of him was gone. But as he lowered his head, he saw a small girl in front of him. The girl was smiling, and Kaido stood puzzled. What's going on? In front of us is high school student, adventurer Takagi Kaido. Was once beaten by a simple goblin with no super strength. But defeating a strange slime he had never seen before allowed him to obtain a servant card. After finding out that the card summons a Valkyrie and is therefore worth 1 billion yen, the hero still wouldn't sell it. He summoned Sylphie and realized his dream of a heroic adventure, along with a girl of extraordinary beauty. As indeed is the dream of any man. Kaido looked around perplexed and the girl turned her head after him. Finally, he asked if she had seen a big beautiful demigoddess in the sky. The girl pointed to herself in embarrassment. The boy laughed in response. He couldn't believe that the crumb in front of him was the very Valkyrie. The hero pointed out her age and did not forget, of course, about the rather large size of her breasts. But the girl demonstrated that her breasts are definitely fine. Unexpectedly, the girl pronounced that she wasn't lying. Addressing Kaido like a host. The guy noted how cute her voice was. The servant girl curtsied and introduced herself. Her name was indeed Sylphie. She had come at the call to serve and wished to be of service. A flushed Kaido looked at the smiling girl and marveled at how cute she was. He was also embarrassed by her age. She looked to be about 10 years old. The wings behind her back and her generally not very human appearance convinced the guy more and more that the servant in front of him was actually a servant. The hero thought with a satisfied smile about how lucky he was with the card. And how he would be envied by the Lilicon players, since this is a real jackpot for them. Still, despite these factors, Kaido fell to the ground and cringed. 1 billion yen, and a servant not at all what he had imagined him to be. The guy reproached himself for not thinking better. He had just wasted his 1 billion yen. Seeing his master's reaction, the servant, slightly stammering, asked what was wrong. Kaido pulled himself back as he realized that Sylphie also had feelings he hadn't thought of. He got off with a phrase about 1 billion reasons and that there were times when he snapped. Reassured the girl that it wasn't dangerous. The servant's eyes glittered. She did not wish to see her master beaten and asked to leave the battles to herself. Kaido was touched by such concern on Sylphie's part, but there was no way he could get rid of the thought of 1 billion yen. The boy's sides seized abruptly and he swore. The servant panicked again about a possible second seizure. But Kaido replied that he was feeling better because of her. He stroked Sylphie's head gratefully, thinking to himself that the choice had been made and there was nothing to regret now. A dream was more important to him than any money. The hero got down on his knee, took Sylphie's hand and said his name. From now on, they would work together. Appalled by this gesture, the servant shrieked for Kaido to stand up immediately. The guy, laughing, asked her not to worry so much about nothing. The pair wandered through the labyrinths and Takagi was beginning to doubt whether Sylphie knew the way for sure. She asked him to trust her. Her inner instinct directed her to one side and she called out to her master. Walking along, Kaido thought about the fact that Sylphie seemed to sense monsters even though she lacked that skill. Previously, the hero would just wander around the dungeon and there would be an encounter with one monster every hour. This is the approximate extraction rate of the first level. Each magic shard brought 500 yen. Now, thanks to the servant, a new dungeon exploration plan can be applied. Knowing the enemy's position, you can collect a lot more magic shards. And with more earnings comes the opportunity to improve your equipment. But such a useful ability of Sylphie still couldn't completely dispel the hero's doubts. Looking at the girl's statute, Kaido noticed that despite her youth, her BP was already 170. Takagi, being at the 3rd level, had a BP of 10. This is one of the most important characteristics for a dungeon explorer. The acronym stands for battle points. It shows a person's combat power as well as his physical stamina. Kaido, being an ordinary high school student, thanks to his enhanced BP, now takes only minor damage from slime attacks. Although the skill is still not enough to fight goblins. It's also important that all these characteristics only work in the dungeon. The hero looked at the card with Sylphie's information and thought about how strange everything was. He found it hard to believe that this girl with the appearance of a child at level 1 already had 170. But after all, she is a class god. Kaido was convincing himself more and more that he had been stupidly tricked. The card showed an adult woman, while the little girl in front of him was standing in front of him. Strangeness with a detection skill that simply wasn't on the list of abilities. The hero hoped that it was just a mistake. Suddenly, the servant informed them that there was a monster waiting for them around the corner. She was going to fight it and show what she could do. As they walked, the boy pondered what people would think if they saw him and the child in the dungeon. Terror gripped him at the thought that the situation would be understood in a perverse way and such a thing would be reported to the guild. His bad thoughts were interrupted by a servant. She had found the monster. The hero looked out of hiding and saw the slime. This convinced him that the servant was indeed able to sense monsters. Kaido asked again if the girl definitely wanted to fight him alone. The one replied in the affirmative. Takagi didn't know all of the servant's abilities, so he was a little worried about her, so small. But confidence was betrayed by the fact that she was still a goddess. Takagi agreed to let the girl go, but warned that he would immediately intervene in case of danger. Sylphie again assured that no help would be needed. The girl abruptly came out of hiding and faced the enemy. Kaido watched her actions contentedly, imagining himself an older brother. Sylphie made a gesture with her hands and summoned divine lightning. The boy raised his head and saw the discharges of light begin to swirl into a funnel. It became more and more powerful, lightning and light filling the entire space. The hero felt himself being swept away by the shock wave. The lightning strike left Kaido in a daze, unable to move. Eventually the wave gained so much force that it sealed the guy to the wall. He stared at the lightning, at the funnel. In his eyes was a complete incomprehension of what was happening here. The hero saw Sylphie catch one of the lightning bolts, which gradually became a spear. It was the divine spear called Rajit. And Kaido shouted in horror to the servant that the slime was long dead and it was time to stop. But the situation only got worse for him. There was a terrifying sound that made the hero go completely mad. He wondered why Sylphie was torturing him so much, for the slime had long since turned to ashes. The climax for Kaido was when a rock flew into his face. Now he realized what power lurked in the servant. The shockwave was felt by other people wandering around the cave on another floor. They were frightened and worried. And there was much to be worried about, for it was on the top floor and there was a danger of collapse. The only thing unclear was the cause. Was it an earthquake? The company quickly reconciled with what happened, After all, for a dungeon is quite normal. They decided to collect the magic shards and return. Sylphie exhaled tiredly. Sylphie ran up to the unfortunate man demanding that the one who had done this to him come out. The master pronounced that it was her own fault. The boy sat down, leaning against the wall. He certainly thought he was going to die, but he asked Sylphie not to worry about what had happened. Just be more careful next time. Sylphie stood shuddering with her head down. With a clenched fist, she admitted her failure as a servant. Kaido replied firmly that the girl was not to blame for anything. And the fault lay with him, for it was he who had told her to do as she pleased. But the servant stubbornly disagreed. The hero gradually rose to his feet and explained to Sylphie that she had done the right thing since she had obeyed her master. After these words, she finally began to calm down. Kaido again said that the girl had done a good job and asked if she believed him. And then he extended his hand with a smile. Sylphie looked at him. She struggled to answer. Finally, very embarrassed and flushed, with a gleam of tears in her eyes, she too held out her hand and said she believed. Kaido once more repeated the offer to work together, and the servant, pleased with her master, accepted it. Takagi walked over to the huge crater left by Sylphie's work and thought excitedly about what would happen when she raised her level. He was even scared to imagine. Everything proved that the card was actually a top-grade elder god and that Sylphie was a true Valkyrie. Guy wondered if he should now address the servant with deference. A sudden sharp sound stunned Kaido. Covering his ears with his hands, he felt a little and his heart might unravel. The hero asked Sylphie if she understood where the sound was coming from. The boy was beginning to think it was an enemy attack. But the servant didn't understand what it was about. She didn't hear the sound and looked a bit confused. Therefore, Kaido realized that the sound was made by Sylphie herself. The hero forced the girl to confess, but the expression on her face became more and more strange and painful. Sylphie fell, her head hitting the ground. She was very uncomfortable, but had to admit that the sounds were made by her stomach. The girl was terribly hungry. The servant, exhausted, was already saying goodbye to her master. But Kaido asked her to hang on. Meanwhile, a strange sound coming from the ground floor was heard by other explorers. It made many people return in a panic. People were indignant with incomprehension and annoyance that the day was filled with sheer trouble. Kaido and Sylphie had been going through the ground floor together for a few days now. On the first day, the servant had overdone it and used too much of her own power, and as a result, her mana had quickly run out. Now they were sitting across from each other and Kaido watched Sylphie eat the magic shards with gusto. The boy wondered if they were so delicious. With each bite, the girl felt herself being filled with life. Kaido realized that when her mana decreased, she would start to feel hungry. The magical shards helped her satisfy her hunger and restore her mana. Kaido noticed that the girl had finished her meal and asked if she was ready to continue hunting. Suddenly, Hitsugaya's words about the servants flashed through his mind. Miss Hitsugaya had told him that when health points dropped to 0, there would be no more opportunity to use the card. A hungry servant is useless in battle, so you can't call them invincible. Takagi thought about how he should be more attentive to Sylphie. And the girl was already feeling the presence of the monster. The hero again noted what useful abilities Sylphie was endowed with. He prepared himself for battle. Kaido destroyed the monsters one by one with the spray and remembered how before Sylphie appeared, he could only deal with one monster per hour. Now, thanks to her, his hunting efficiency had increased 6 times. The guy thought about how his motivation was stronger now. After all, he had been hunting slimes alone for the past 2 years. Sylphie sensed the enemy again. Kaido looked at the girl and realized that he had become stronger because she appeared beside him. The hero was very grateful to her, but he couldn't express it in words. The girl noticed her master's inner turmoil and asked if everything was all right. Kaido only asked if she would like to continue traveling. The guy showed Sylphie a slide of magic shards. These were the trophies from 3 months. Kaido happily announced that today they had broken a new record for destroying slimes and had managed to get 8 pieces in an hour. Sylphie gazed mesmerized at the shards and drooled. The boy realized that the girl must have been hungry by now. But the servant didn't want to admit it. Sylphie said that she had already eaten enough and could continue to help him further. And those precious magic shards the master had obtained at the risk of his own life were untouchable. Kaido persuaded the servant to take a couple of shards because she was helping to find the enemies, so there was some merit to it. But the girl flatly refused to take the treat because only the one who fought has the right to eat them. Sylphie explained that she was a Valkyrie, and if she didn't get them herself in battle, she had no right to take them. Kaido wondered. Since Sylphie had her own rules, things were rather complicated. And there was a reason why it was better for her not to fight slimes. They had conducted many tests of her divine lightning skill on slimes. The result was a rough estimate. Kaido found out that Sylphie could adjust the power of divine lightning, thus reducing mana consumption. At its minimum power, it could fire 9 shots, while at its maximum power it could only fire 2. But to know how much power is consumed in total, more checks are required. Slimes die from a minimum power hit. It takes 1 magic shard per shot. Thus, once you gain 1 magic shard, you spend it. Therefore, the profit is 0. No benefit will be gained. And it is very important to keep track of income and expenditure. Sylphie was useful to Kaido even without using her skills. The guy drew a picture in his head of sending a little girl to the front lines while he stood behind her and gave orders. Such a thing he didn't think was acceptable. The hero asked the servant to take on the role of a scout. She would find slimes and he would destroy them. Kaido thought it would be a good idea to go down to the first floor with Sylphie so she could fight there. But he doubted he would survive. While the guy was pondering, a new problem appeared. Kaido suddenly saw that his level had risen to Slime Killer. This meant that all of his stats would be increased by 50% during battle. The hero side, the skill seemed rather weak to him. It was also surprising that it was happening right now. Although he had killed over 3,000 slimes without receiving a single injury, but it looked suspicious. Sylphie enthusiastically congratulated her master and was happy that now the hunt would go even faster. The hero on the other hand stared disappointedly at the screen. He was not satisfied with his level 4 and the useless skill he had received. Kaido suggested to the servant to finish the hunt for today. She was surprised because it was still early. He explained that he wanted to prepare for the next day. And the next day called for Sylphie. The servant appeared, enveloped in a bright light. She thanked her master for summoning her. Kaido looked at her at this time and thought that every time she appeared, he always expected to see her in that same gigantic form. But was afraid that then his heart would jump out of his chest. Sylphie noticed the shield behind the guy's back and remarked that it was very cool. Kaido showed off not only his new steel shield, but also his new wooden sword. It was the best he could afford. In 3 months, it was possible to accumulate 1,000 magic slimes. Considering that each slime cost 500 yen, it came out to 500,000. All the expenses left 112,500 yen. Sylphie praised Hwine for being smart, because now slime hunting would be even safer. But Kaido corrected her because he was going to fight a different opponent today. The boy went to the stairs and said that today he wanted to go to the first floor. As the heroes went down the stairs, the servant admitted that the moment was exciting for her because it was the first time she was going down to the first floor. Kaido was deep down afraid of a second encounter with those goblins, but he couldn't go on and on hunting slimes. Takagi asked Sylphie if she was okay with him fighting alone. The girl agreed. The hero apologetically informed the servant that she would only be able to reach her potential at the lower levels. But before descending lower, he needed to deal with those goblins himself. Sylphie noticed that it was much darker here than on the ground floor. Kaido saw the same pile of rubbish that seemed to have gotten even bigger. But there were no goblins around. The servant felt someone's presence. The hero's body was covered with cold sweat. He guessed that the opponents were hiding. The lad's legs trembled. He remembered the moment when he had been beaten. Now he could no longer control himself. His whole body trembled as if a powerful engine were running nearby. Kaido turned completely pale and was already deciding to return. Sylphie noticed his condition and asked if he was all right. The girl thought that the master had had another seizure. The boy quickly pulled himself together. He should have behaved like a man. He replied that he was fine and would fight the goblins. Kaido only saw a pile of rubbish. There were no monsters anywhere. The boy suggested looking around the place. Then suddenly the hero shouted and struck the pile with his wooden sword. But from there only a rat ran out in terror. Kaido couldn't believe it. Were they really not here? But the goblins at this moment were sitting under the ceiling, right above his head. The hero looked up and the monsters immediately flew at him. Kaido managed to cover himself with his shield. He spotted his old sword in the hands of one of them and was convinced that they were the same goblins. Sylphie was very angered by what was happening and was about to summon lightning, but Kaido stopped her. The goblins were making him furious and annoyed. He decided to slam them against the wall. The intended action succeeded. The sealed enemies screamed in pain. The enraged guy was confident of his victory. After all, with the level he had acquired, he had more battle points. The goblins continued to resist. One of them managed to get out from under the shield and rushed at Kaido. At that moment, Sylphie intervened. She grabbed the monster's leg. A servant could not allow her master to be harmed. Such a thing was unforgivable to her. Sylphie swung so hard in anger that there was almost nothing left of the monster that flew into the wall. Kaido saw this and was dumbfounded. Sylphie, blushing, excused herself. She said that although she had disobeyed, she hadn't used the skills. Kaido simply thanked her. He thought about how easily she had done it. Besides, there was still one goblin left and his hero had already definitely taken over. The opponents rushed at each other. Kaido used his wooden sword to deliver a critical blow to the head. The blow reverberated painfully down his arm. He felt as if he had hit a brick. The goblin, on the other hand, only rubbed his head. Kaido couldn't believe his eyes. There was no effect. He panicked, began to think about fleeing the battlefield, but that was unworthy, even in front of Sylphie. As he thought of the servant, he suddenly heard her voice. She was confident that Kaido could handle. The servant, clenching her fists, repeated that he could win. Kaido scolded himself for being weak. He had decided to act like a man, so it was impossible to back down. Calming himself down, the hero pondered where to hit the goblin. The monster is strong, but he still has a weak spot. And the guy seems to have found it. The enemy suddenly jumped and swung his wooden sword, but Kaido managed to cover himself with his shield. The next blow, and mutual, from both sides, came to the face. The goblin fell as if struck by a bolt of lightning. It seemed to be dead, but Kaido was unsure and feared to rejoice. After waiting for a bit, the guy still couldn't stand it and began to cheer loudly. Suddenly, he felt weakness in his legs. But then Sylphie came to his aid and picked up the hero, preventing him from falling. She, smiling broadly, praised Kaido. The boy was embarrassed. He thought he was able to win because of this girl's faith in him. Sylphie isn't just strong, she increases his chances of winning. He would even call her the goddess of victories. Sylphie carefully laid the hero's head in her lap. Kaido, despite some pain from her knee pads, still felt very good. He lay there and dreamed of spreading the religion about the goddess Sylphie throughout the world. Takagi, in full ammunition, stepped past the defeated goblin. The one lay there, flaring up. The hero reckoned it was the fourth. Kaido looked at the fallen enemy and remembered how difficult it had been to fight the goblin in the beginning. Now, however, he was capable of defeating him one-on-one. Sylphie, with the words "what an incredible master," climbed up for a hug. The blushing guy thought that hugging after every battle was somehow too much. But Sylphie replied that this way she was supporting him, and support is very important. Kaido said that it's okay since he's not afraid of goblins anymore. The hero demonstrated that he was confidently standing on his feet and began to perform a jerk dance. Sylphie was delighted with her master. Kaido reflected on the fact that he had spent 2 years fighting slimes on the ground floor and had only been able to raise 4 levels in that time. Now, in a short time on the first floor, he already had a 9th level. In addition, thanks to the battle with the goblins, the hero gained a new skill of Goblin Killer. It allowed him to increase all stats by 10% when fighting them. Kaido imagined himself with a wooden sword in one hand and bug spray in the other. He was surrounded by enemies on all sides. But the hero was calm, for his 2 skills of Slime Killer and Goblin Killer would protect him like 2 sharp swords. And then Sylphie confessed that she was happy because the master was getting stronger. But she is very sad that she can't fight alongside him. Kaido was confused. He told Sylphie not to worry because when the hero reaches the 10th level, he will go to the next floor. There will already be serious monsters on it, and then it will be time for the servant to enter the battle. Kaido realized that Sylphie was a cheater character. Servant Valkyrie, presumably her SR rank, is capable of killing an entire horde of goblins in an instant. There was also the realization that he couldn't rely on Sylphie's strength all the time. One must constantly improve oneself, as befits a mob. The girl sensed the enemy. She reported that the one was heading in their direction. Kaido rejoiced. A skeleton was heading towards the heroes. It demanded to leave this goblin. The guy didn't understand what it all meant and why the skeleton. The action moved to the school where Takagi was studying. Numerous hulks stood, and students were wandering about. In the classroom in front of Kaido sat two students, Tazutaki Hayato and Oyata Shinji. Tazutaki asked Kaido if he still went to that dungeon. From Takagi's face, covered in patches, it was immediately clear. Hayato reprimanded the hero, since he had just recently been discharged from the hospital. He asked how many times the slime had hit the guy. Kaido replied that he was done with slimes. Oyata couldn't believe it, had the hero stopped doing research. But Takagi revealed that he was now hunting goblins on the first floor. The other guy thought that he must have wanted to take revenge. To himself, Kaido remembered passing out when he saw that skeleton. Sylphie had gotten rid of it. He wouldn't want his mates to find out what had happened. Chizutaki admitted that research was certainly a good thing, but advised him not to hang out there all the time. Oyata agreed. He explained that if an already unpopular guy spent all his time in the dungeon, he would never be able to find a girlfriend. Kaido was upset that those straight in his eyes were calmly saying nasty things to him. The guys noticed this and said that they didn't have girlfriends. Themselves either. The trio looked around. Opposite were just sitting and chatting sweetly with three girls. Kaido immediately caught a glimpse of one of them, with long, loose hair. He turned purple and was filled with an inner glow. The girl reminded him of an angel. Her name was Katsuragi. The mates only sighed, they didn't want to listen to love raptures again. Chizutaki recalled that Kaido and Katsuragi were childhood friends, but now he had never seen the two of them socializing together. It was a sore subject for Kaido. He sank into his childhood memories. A picture appeared in his mind of him struggling to catch up with Haruka, who was wearing a plaid dress with beautiful bows and waving a spike in her hand. They were now sitting at their desks as if they were at different poles. Kaido wondered at what point the relationship began to grow cold. There was a moment when he noticed that the girl was constantly worried when being around him. And then the hero decided that he would keep his distance. Oyata, laughing, told Kaido that when he had slept on the desk recently, Katsuragi had stared at him for quite a while. The boy couldn't believe it and wondered if he should sleep some more in that case. Shinji even compared Haruka's gaze to the kind of gaze one gets when looking at a bug. What the comrade gave out offended Kaido. Chizutaki pointed out that the girl was very popular, so what did she care about the constantly battered dungeon fan? Oyata agreed. He said that if he were in the girl's shoes, he would stay away from the weirdo who walks around in bandages every day. Kaido was torn and didn't know what to think. His greatest fear was that Katsuragi hated him. The girl turned around. The mates noticed it, of course. They started making jokes. Chizutaki suddenly called Haruki and shouted that he and Kaido were talking about her. The hero was very angry with Hayato and ordered him to shut up. Takagi remembered with pain in his heart how in the back of his mind he had decided to confess to his beloved after he would have passed the first floor. Covering his head with his hands, Kaido thought that not only in the dungeon, but also in his personal life, he needed to make even more effort. The hero decided that he would definitely confess to her only after reaching the 10th floor. The National Dungeon Research Center, better known as SOSC. Kaido sat at the 4th reception desk, with Miss Hitsugaya sitting in front of him. She held the award pouch in front of her. The staff member formally congratulated Takagi on achieving the new stone rank token. Kaido took the token, smiled happily and thought that the losing streak seemed to be over. Hitsugaya explained that after reaching 20 battle points, a hero is promoted to stone rank. After obtaining the stone rank, the Explorer Center provided benefits and subsidies. In other words, by acquiring this rank you become a full-fledged dungeon explorer. Miss continued that about 40% of explorers fail in obtaining the wooden rank, but it was worth fighting for. And Kaido couldn't take his eyes off the new stone token. The hero thought that it was worth thanking Sylphie for it. But the 2 years he had spent in solitary research weren't a waste of time either. Hitsugaya suddenly indicated that she wanted to talk about something else. She asked if Takagi knew that the east side of the ground floor was closed for a week. Kaido remembered the rumors about noise and earthquake and asked if they were true. Hitsugaya could only reply that the place that had become the epicenter of the confusion was being investigated, so all information was being kept top secret. Kaido thought about the earthquake and the noise. He was worried whether it was related to that very day on the ground floor. Anyway, the hero decided that what Sylphie did that day, he would keep it a secret. Miss Hitsugaya pronounced that she had a couple of questions for him about what had happened. She stared at Takagi and said that she knew that Takagi was just exploring the east side of the ground floor that day. She asked the boy to tell her what had happened then. Kaido was covered in sweat and became very nervous at how much the atmosphere had changed. He pretended that he was at home that day. But the employee replied that his name was on the visitors list at the east entrance. She read Section 24 of the Dungeon Act. It said that an unintentional act in which damage was done to the dungeon was subject to a fine. In the case of a malicious one, imprisonment was due. Kaido thought back to that very broken wall and decided that he would call it a fatal coincidence. The hero feared that if Sylphie was recognized as dangerous, it would be taken away from him. Realizing that things were bad, Kaido chose to lie to the end. Stammering, he tried to say that he had explored the western part and it was business as usual. Completely unable to bear the strain, Kaido blurted out that it was simply unrealistic for a mob like him. Misinterrogated if the hero was sure he hadn't seen anything out of the ordinary. The guy had expected such a thing from Isekai'd and confirmed his words. The staff member clarified whether she had correctly understood that Kaido had entered through the east entrance to get to the west area. She asked why the guy needed to take such a long journey. The hero replied that he didn't want to do any hunting, but was just taking care of his health and taking a quiet walk. Just then, Kaido shamed himself for such a silly excuse. Miss Hitsugaya watched perplexed. The guy further berated himself in his head for not coming up with something better. The staff member bowed her head and apologized. To Kaido, it seemed like akin to a miracle. Hitsugaya explained that the superiors had ordered that all researchers entering there be interviewed. The hero exhaled, for he had been saved. Still, he thought it would be a good idea to train his mind. Miss Hitsugaya wanted to know why Kaido was all scarred up again, assuming it was from the dungeon collapse. The boy replied that it was the effects of a recent encounter with a skeleton. She gave him a meaningful look. So much so that Kaido went cold, fearing whether he had said too much. The staff member decided to stop there and suggested that the hero go home early tonight. Kaido awkwardly got up and, promising to come back again, headed for the exit. Miss Hitsugaya, on the other hand, promised to wait. She looked after the departing hero and smiled. And then a giggle was heard. It was Nakoda, the employee sitting next to her. She asked why she had let the guy go, since he obviously knew something. Hitsugaya asked not to report upstairs. Nakoda laughed again and remarked that for all the kindness of her colleague, she would not want to become her enemy. Hitsugaya asked what the colleague thought of the guy. Nakoda hesitated for a moment. Kaido at this time was walking past a sturdy, full-bodied man. Or rather, was walking straight at him. And Hitsugaya realized that a collision was unavoidable. And so it happened. The man, reproaching the guy for his frail physique, demanded an apology from him. Kaido replied that he had barely hit him and that the man had frightened him. The fat man shouted that he would not allow himself to be called scary. Nakoda reasoned that fights between dungeon explorers were inevitable. The conditions of entry had been lowered, wanting to increase the flow of explorers, so their quality had dropped significantly. Hitsugaya, on the other hand, felt that the topic should not concern them. The dungeon itself would weed out those who lacked qualifications. The man grabbed Kaido by the throat and questioned how such a petty thing with only a stone rank dared to pretend to be an explorer. Nakoda pointed out to Miss Hitsugi that the guy was not properly equipped now, so it seemed doubtful that he would be able to cope. She also expressed that the hero was not good at lying and was unable to argue with Hitsugi. Nakoda assumed that the guy was about to be beaten. But Hitsugi didn't think so. The man punched Kaido in the face with his fist. Security guards were already running to help. Kaido decided that he needed to find a new weapon to fight the skeletons. So he walked into the armory shop. The hero stood near the swords and admired. The muscular man asked the guy if he had fought another stone-level explorer, and noted at the same time his courage. He guessed that Kaido was unable to fight back, and began to explain that it was because, behind the obsession with status points, the hero had completely forgotten about basic skills. Takagi was ashamed and apologized. The man, boasting about his muscles, said that the guy was only beaten up because he lacked muscle mass. The man was the owner of the shop. Kaido remembered that the man seemed to have been quite an outstanding researcher before. The shopkeeper insisted that in order to become a first-class explorer, one must not only raise his status but also train his body, even outside the dungeon. The hero realized that this shop could not only stock up, but also offer a lot of useful advice. Hearing that Takagi wanted to know how to fight against skeletons, the man wondered why the guy was scared by an ordinary pile of bones. The master replied that you just have to gather all your strength and break its bones. Kaido determined that the man apparently lived by the principle of whoever was stronger would win. And judging from his words, he solved all problems by brute force. The man, noticing that the hero was skeptical of his words, went to find him a new weapon, not forgetting to call him a dead man. Kaido's budget was 200,000 yen, and the guy was worried about what he would do if the owner brought something expensive. A recovery potion was on display in the window. It was considered low-grade and cost 100,000 yen. Kaido was annoyed why a low-grade potion cost so much, but still curious if it really did heal wounds in an instant. Still, the thing was beyond the guy's means, even though the income had increased greatly with Sylphie's appearance. The next thing the hero noticed was a magic bag with a subspace storage worth 10 million yen. Kaido imagined he would have quietly put several anti-slime sprays and magic cores in it at once. But the cost was simply prohibitive. The hero calculated that if each core he mined cost between 500 and 700 yen, then this item was out of his reach. He imagined a huge pyramid of defeated enemies, at the very top of which lay this bag. The thought occurred to Kaido that if he were to ever get another SR servant card again, he could sell it profitably. But dreams are unfulfilled, for it's a 1 in a million chance. The hero thought that the fact that he was able to get one such was a miracle, so the second one wasn't even worth counting on. At this time, the shopkeeper returned. He was glad that Kaido had waited for him. The man handed the boy a tungsten staff and told him that in the dungeon, thanks to the statistics, even an ordinary child would be able to handle it. Kaido took the staff in his hands and sagged under its weight. The master laughed and noted that the boy's reaction was predictable, because the density of tungsten was 3 times that of iron. The hero made a remark to the host, for he had previously said that it was not good to rely only on one's statistics. The man replied that one should only see it as a little trick, not a solution to the problem. The tungsten staff was much longer than the wooden sword, so it needed to be used a little differently. In order not to exert so much force, one must use the pendulum effect. Kaido looked at his reflection in the shining staff and realized that it was indeed much more powerful than the wooden sword. Dungeon. The hero stood in front of the goblin and thrust the new staff at him. The monster was crushed from the force of the blow. It collapsed to the ground. Kaido kept himself on his feet, with an agitated Sylphie standing beside him. The boy exhaled and pronounced that he now seemed to have mastered his new weapon. The servant expressed her admiration. Kaido thought that it was just as the man from the shop said, and in the dungeon, thanks to his stats, the guy handled this staff with ease. Wooden swords were useless against goblins, and the staff eliminated them with ease. The lad asked the servant if she thought this purchase was worthwhile. He only had 200,000 yen left. Sylphie hesitated. Kaido remembered how the shopkeeper had assured him that for that kind of money he would become their regular customer, and how he had given the hero a bottle of high-end potion as a bonus. And later the guy saw a similar staff online for 180,000, and the bottle was empty. The annoying memories were interrupted by Sylphie. She felt someone. Around the corner, several skeletons appeared out of the darkness. Kaido counted 3 of them, and they were apparently going to attack the heroes. The boy turned white and trembled violently. Seeing his master's condition, Sylphie said that there was no need to be afraid since the enemies were few, and offered to destroy them with a lightning discharge. But Kaido was offended that the servant saw his weakness. The girl apologized. In an instant, the skeletons began to attack. Takagi prepared for battle and ordered Sylphie to duck. Not for nothing, after all, he had spent time watching horror films at night to strengthen his mental state and trained with his staff to increase his muscle mass. Kaido was gaining punching power, about to demonstrate his he dealt with skeletons like a tungsten tornado. He used a similar technique in his battle with spray against the elusive slime. The impact scattered the skeletons one by one. Kaido crouched down and grasped his hand that was trembling from exertion. Sylphie immediately fussed around him, but the hero assured the girl that he was fine. After regaining consciousness and standing up, Takagi saw that there were many more skeletons. They were encircling the heroes. One of the skeletons approached the boy and tried to grab his head with its teeth. Kaido stood in a daze and thought that the failure count had opened up again. The skeletons had already completely trapped the heroes in a ring, but the guy seemed to have thought of something. He realized that the opponents were not particularly strong, and taking up his weapon again began to crush them. Once again the shopkeeper came to mind and explained to him that skeletons were just poor souls without muscles. Kaido, covered in a pile of bones, still continued to fight. Finally, the carnage was over. The hero uttered a final amen. Sylphie was surprised. He stood and performed an act similar to a ritual. Takagi wasn't sure that the skeletons were definitely monsters. Perhaps they were the remains of dead seekers. In that case, the hero wanted to rest them in peace. The servant folded her hands in prayer. Suddenly, a slime appeared. He sat in a window formed by the damage to the wall. Kaido asked Sylphie if she had noticed how long the monster had been sitting there. But the girl replied that her radar had failed to detect this slime. The slime sat there without moving. It was not an ordinary slime, but golden and glowing. The hero had previously assumed that the monster was now asleep. Given this circumstance, the chance to attack was very convenient. But the monster was sitting so high up in the opening that it would be difficult to reach it without scaring it. And in that case, it would immediately escape into that hole. Sylphie offered to launch her lightning bolt at him. But by doing so, she would only destroy the magic core, and perhaps also a rare item. Slime woke up. He turned to the heroes, and it turned out that the monster was indeed rare. It had a human mouth. More specifically, a woman's lips. Slime attacked, spitting at Kaido. The saliva, once it hit the ground, began to corrode it. The boy guessed it was a poisonous attack. And the slime had already started spitting non-stop. Kaido didn't understand why the monster was doing this. He was annoyed by such bullying. Getting on the skeletons, the saliva was destroying the magic cores. This made the hero go into a complete rage. Takagi threw himself at the monster with the intention of treating it with his tungsten staff. But the slime did not target the hero, but Sylphie. The servant tried to give Kaido a shield and didn't notice the attack. The boy screamed in terror. He ran up to Sylphie and covered her with his body. Kaido braced himself for the unbearable pain. The hero wished he had bought that low-grade potion then, even though he would have had no savings left. Scolding himself, he realized that he would definitely not have got off with minor injuries now. But no pain was still felt. Kaido turned around and saw a shining shield behind his back. It turned out that Sylphie had created a protective sphere around them. For a servant to want a monster to harm his master was unforgivable. Slime continued his poisonous attack, but the situation had changed. The heroes were protected by a protective sphere. Kaido wondered if this dome was another skill of Sylphie's. He remembered how the skill Impregnable Fortress of the Maiden had been obtained a few days earlier. The divine skill consisted of faith and reverence and prevented anything hostile from penetrating. Takagi sat in the dome and watched as the slimes around him tried unsuccessfully to break through the defenses. It became clear that attacks from outside were being completely blocked. He reached through the dome with his wooden sword and, activating the slime killer ability, struck the monster. It turned out that they could be attacked inside the barrier, which was quite useful. Given this fact, it would be worth using some kind of long-range weapon, for example, a crossbow. But considering the budget, it would be rational to opt for a replacement for the main weapon. Besides, Kaido was too lazy to practice. The hero noticed that Sylphie was shaking a lot. The girl fell to the ground and explained that 2 minutes was her limit. Kaido apologized for thinking too much. It appeared that it was necessary to hold one's breath and fold one's arms to activate the skill, meaning that a servant had the same lung capacity as a normal person. Sylphie, of course, thought that it was all trivial and was willing to not breathe at all for the sake of protecting her master. It even seemed to Kaido that she wasn't joking. The hero was very happy that the girl was putting in so much effort to protect him, but he didn't want Sylphie to endure pain because of it. Therefore, he asked her to stop using the skill if she felt it. Kaido took Sylphie's hand and explained that if she died protecting him, he probably wouldn't be able to summon her into the world anymore. He didn't want that to happen. The hero's main desire was to explore this dungeon together with the girl. Sylphie became embarrassed and promised to listen to the request. Kaido decided to inquire about the full description of the fortress skill. He found out that the servant was unable to move on his own while using it. The mana requirement was much less than a lightning strike, only 5 units. But what interested the hero the most was how many attacks the defense could withstand. He turned to Sylphie with the question, but the girl was acting strangely. She pressed the hand that Kaido had grasped against her face. Awakening from his reverie, the servant replied that he didn't know, but the fortress of the maiden had yet to be broken by anyone. Sylphie was sure that as long as she held her breath, the fortress of the maiden was indestructible. The heroes stood under the dome in front of a golden slime with smiling human lips. Kaido shared the girl's confidence, for the fortress was able to block even a powerful acid attack. But the guy realized that he had to finish off the monster as soon as possible, for they were only safe until Sylphie started breathing again. He promised the servant to deal with the enemy quickly. Kaido thought that even though the slime was unobtuse, his slime killer's skillet would work on him as well. So he reached for his staff. At that moment, an acidic drop fell on the weapon. It corroded the material. Kaido became hysterical because his 200,000 yen had just disappeared. The hero realized that without the tungsten staff, the monster was impossible to reach. And the spray wasn't suitable in this situation either, because the slime would just hide in the hole. Kaido thought about what he could throw at it. The guy looked at Sylphie. The servant had been using her defense skill for 30 seconds already. Takagi pondered that he could have asked the girl to use the Divine Lightning Strike skill, but then the likely rare item from it would also be destroyed. The hero scolded himself that in such danger his thoughts were preoccupied with acquiring the reward. Kaido remembered that Sylphie could customize the power of her attacks. Even though one of the 3 nukes had been destroyed, internally the guy was convinced that luck was on their side this time. Kaido ordered Sylphie to immediately take out the fortress of the maiden as soon as he signaled, and then attack it with the weakest lightning. The hero also asked the servant not to be afraid if the monster targeted her because he would use his shield to block its saliva. The monster's stinking saliva reminded Kaido of something, and he reached into his bag. The guy pulled out a tin of surströmming deep-sea fish. He thought it was the stinkiest weapon in the world. In general, he planned to use this tool to capture on the 3rd floor. Besides, the hero didn't know if slimes had a sense of smell. He had encountered slimes that moved as if they were sniffing something, but there was no definitive information on that. Still, he decided to give it a try. Kaido planned an attack. He thought that a direct attack wouldn't be successful, but throwing a can of tin food into that hole would cut off the monster's escape route. The guy wanted to smoke his opponent out. Sylphie was still standing there holding her breath. Kaido asked if she could bear it a little longer. The plan was risky, but there was no time to hesitate. And there was no other course of action either. The guy opened the jar and a nauseating aroma sprayed over him. He tried to force himself not to panic and to be patient. The odor had already enveloped his whole face and he had to dump the nasty load faster. Kaido couldn't take it anymore and kicked the tins away with his foot. The can, bouncing off the ground, filled the entire space with stench. The monster was interested in the object. And Takagi was already feeling dizzy. The weapon was far more powerful than he had imagined. The monster sniffed at it. The guy was afraid he was going to run away. But the slime, drooling, leapt for the tin food. Kaido, holding back his gagging, was amazed. He couldn't believe that the monster liked the smell. While the enemy was licking his prey with pleasure, the hero was heading towards him with insect spray. Announcing that he had lost the battle, Kaido used his weapon. It was now the latest freezing spray. Even such a monster wouldn't be able to resist it. Kaido shouted to Sylphie that he was done and she could remove the shield. Out of the corner of his eye, he noticed a glow. Indeed, the map was glowing, that is, an object had appeared. Kaido looked at it with awe and admiration. The guy remembered that Sylphie's card had fallen out of the rainbow slime with legs, so he had expected a rare item from the golden slime with a mouth as well. But the fact that the wish came true was unbelievable. Kaido stared at the second lucky ticket with his mouth open. The hero realized that he had received the second servant card. Sitting on his knees and trembling with excitement, the boy thanked the gods. He looked at the card and it was the same as Sylphie's card. And again the writings unknown to him, which he could somehow read, which he did. The writing stood for Luke Elia. A crackling sound was heard. It was Sylphie. The girl ducked her face into the ground. Kaido remembered her talking about how she was willing to not breathe at all for the sake of her master. A terrifying thought flashed through the hero's mind. But after all, he had told her that it was possible to remove the skill. Another assumption was that the girl was hungry. Takagi, supporting Sylphie's head, shouted for her to start breathing. And the servant covered her nose with her hands because she could smell a vile odor. Kaido interjected. Sylphie said that she had accidentally inhaled and now it felt like she was turning inside out. The boy laughed. It was clear to him now that even SR servant had an ordinary sense of smell. The servant apologized, but Kaido said that the fault lay with him, since he was the one who had used such a choking technique. The hero was very glad that Sylphie was alright and wiped away the tears that had protruded. Sylphie still covered her face with her hands, but it was noticeable that she was embarrassed. This time, Kaido made an exception and gave the kernels he had received to a servant. As a result of today's trek, the heroes had obtained 5 slime cores, 3 goblin cores, 6 skeleton cores, and an SR class servant card. But there were some rather depressing losses, such as a tungsten staff worth 200,000 yen. In front of us are the beautiful forms of Miss Hitsugai. She explains that there are servant cards that are called demonic cards. So the question remained whether Kaido would benefit from the new card he received. The guy noticed that Miss looked stunning as always. The staff member told him that many people shun such cards because of their involvement with the devilish side, but as companions for adventurers, they were as good as divine cards. Kaido was interested in the price. Hitsugaya replied that SR cards were quite rare, so those who got them would go straight to the auction. And there you could get 100 million yen for it. The hero lit up. He was already imagining mountains of money notes. The price of such a card was lower than a divine card of the same rank. All because the one who risked summoning a demon could receive a curse. Kaido asked to be told exactly what kind of curse could be expected. But the staff member replied that the hero did not have the necessary clearance for this information. Takagi realized that limited access was a significant problem. After all, it seemed that it was useless to search for anything on the internet either. It was unlikely that anyone possessed information that was unknown to the guild. Besides, it had long been rumored that all of the country's information went through the guilds first. To Kaido, the Devil's Curse still sounded creepy and he considered selling the map to Lukelia. But it remained unclear whether it would be possible to sell it with Sylphie's presence. Hitsugaya repeated that she really couldn't give details about the curse. But she pointed out that even though the summoned creature would belong to the devilish side, it would still obey its master. There was a possibility that the summoned creature would curse its master, but in all the time such a case had been recorded all but once. The staff member with a sweet smile reassured Kaido that the probability of being cursed was very small. And in the case of a successful summoning, the person would receive a rare SR rank servant. The boy laughed nervously and began to reassure her that he had just asked out of curiosity, and he wasn't expecting such a thing anyway. He got up from the table and promised to come back as soon as he collected new magic cores. Hitsugaya promised to wait as usual. From under the table, Nakoda peeked out. She asked her colleague if she had correctly realized that the guy had been caught by a demon. Hitsugaya didn't know the exact answer. Considering that the researcher who was doing solo dungeon traversal every day, and after the recent incident, his scores had skyrocketed, it was obvious that the guy was hiding something. Nakoda suggested that it might not have been about the servant, but simply that he might have given up solo passage and joined the strong seekers. Hitsugaya disagreed with the version. Many have done exactly that, but Kaido is a special case. Based on the investigation team's report, what happened in the Eastern Dungeon was the work of one person. And clearly an extraterrestrial force was involved. Probably a servant of SR rank. Miss Hitsugi really wished that Kaido would find the strength to open up to her instead of continuing to hide everything. Takagi lay on the desk wrinkled and clearly not sleeping. He had spent all night researching the internet, but just as Hitsugaya had said, no information had turned up. Out of desperation, Kaido even thought that the shop owner might know some information. But immediately he imagined the latter playing with his muscles and convincing him that if he pumped up his muscles, all his problems would go away. Kaido was approached by Hayato. He asked why the hero looked so tired even though it was still only morning. Takagi explained that he had been searching for certain information all night. Hayato decided that it was probably related to the dungeon. Kaido was surprised by the hit and a little scared that his friend might well have the skill of mind reading. But Hayato just knew him too well. Haruki cautiously watched and thought how strange Kaido was. The hero sat on the floor beside the bed and kept trying to find some information. He pulled out a map labeled Lukelia and thought. Then poked his finger at the place where the status should have been indicated. But this information wasn't there because outside the dungeon, the information couldn't be viewed. Kaido unfolded the note sheet and praised himself for writing everything down in advance. Lukelia was a Viscount class demon. From the looks of it, she was roughly on par with Sylphie. There was also a title written down, which meant a high-class servant. Kaido imagined that if he managed to sell the map, he could get at least 100 million. Which meant he could afford high-end potions, magic sets, and even possibly magic spheres. And if the sale didn't happen, Kaido had already even made up a new class of divine demonic summoner. An angel would sit behind his right shoulder and a demon behind his left shoulder. Kaido spotted something very cool to him on the map. A guy noticed a glowing mark on Sylphie's map and couldn't figure out why it appeared. The glow turned into a bright flash. Sylphie was in a luxurious bathtub, amidst flowers, like a goddess in a garden, taking a shower. A knife flew up to her on wings. The girl noticed it. The eye looked around restlessly and could not understand where it was or what was happening. Sylphie closed the tap and turned to the flying creature as her master. It was now clear that Kaido was peeking at her. I felt very uncomfortable and awkward as the servant left the bathtub uncovered. She was touched by her master's concern. Sylphie stepped on the floor, leaving wet footprints. She asked Kaido not to worry, for the girl had done a thorough ablution and got rid of the fishy odor especially before the new summoning. Sylphie turned round to him, completely naked. Her long loose hair covered her breasts. She really did look like a goddess. A maiden of incomparable beauty stood before Kaido. The hero could not believe that it was Sylphie. The maiden bent over, hanging her huge breasts over Kaido's eye. She tried to hear what he was saying and asked him to make it louder. Kaido, dying of embarrassment, threw the card away. He said he didn't intend to peek and apologized profusely. The guy woke up on the floor in his own room. There was a map lying under his feet. He looked at it and saw a thin beam of light coming from the center. The hero realized that Sylphie was calling for him. Kaido was not eager to look into the servant's bathroom again. But in the back of his mind, he wanted to meet. Sylphie met him this time dressed and outdoors. She was sitting at a table under a tree in a beautiful dress and pouring tea. The servant got worried when the guy shouted sharply and disappeared, so she was very happy to see him. And Kaido was upset that it turned out not to be a continuation in the bathroom. The hero looked around. There were mountains all around. Sylphie explained that they were in the world of Erdgar, which separated the world of humans and the world of gods. On a branch sat two strange bird-like creatures. One was distinguished by its horns, the other by its lips. And both had one eye each. Kaido asked if there were servants like Sylphie. The girl replied that only those who didn't have their own base lived in this world. In this world, the passage of time flowed differently than in the human world. This pure and innocent world had never been polluted by the influence of other worlds. Kaido inquired about what exactly was happening to time. The servant explained that one could be in this world for hours, and in his world only a moment would pass. So Sylphie asked her master to take it easy and relax, besides she had already prepared tea for him. The drink was made from magic kernels, by boiling for a long time in the purest holy water. The boy was examining the tea with his eye, which looked like lava. Sylphie noticed that the hero in his current state wouldn't be able to cope without a pipe. The girl also noticed that he was clearly embarrassed by the tea made from magic cores. And she explained that since he was now in the body of one of the inhabitants of this world, even if he drank the tea, nothing would happen to his real body. Kaido thought that he was now like an avatar. Takagi was in flight using a straw to drink the drink and was happy to have acquired a new skill. Sylphie had already brought whipped cream buns and was offering them to try. Hero enjoyed the warm breeze and the beauty of the surrounding nature. Kaido and Sylphie sat and gazed peacefully into the distance. The surrounding world was seen as a utopia. Suddenly, an incomprehensible dark creature appeared in the sky, spewing flames. The boy couldn't believe it, for Sylphie had said it was a pure and innocent world. Servant. The girl seemed not to notice what was happening and smiled. Kaido had a strange feeling from her smile. As he sipped tea from his pipe, he thought to himself that he wasn't sure if Sylphie was definitely in front of him. Usually the hero perceived her as a younger sister, but now it felt like she was an older sister. Takagi recalled all three appearances. As a giant goddess, the one in front of him now, and as a little girl. He was trying to figure out which of those forms was her true appearance. The hero had so many questions for the girl, but for some reason he was very worried. It was the same feeling he had when he first met Isekai'd. It was terrifying. Kaido trembled then, stammered, and then bit his tongue. The hero was afraid that Sylphie would be disappointed in him. But immediately reassured himself, because the girl had always been kind and nice to him. Kaido imagined how they sat together naked and he pressed against the girl's chest. and Sylphie was in the image of a beautiful angel with huge wings. But the reverie was interrupted by Sylphie herself. The girl merely wondered why Kaido had stopped talking so abruptly. She moved so close to the hero, making him visibly nervous. The servant suggested that he didn't like the tea or the snack, but the boy assured her that everything was wonderful. Then the girl directly asked if she had upset Kaido in any way. She noticed that usually he was always so animated when interacting with her, but not now. Kaido didn't want to bother Sylphie. He was always let down by his habit of falling out of reality while he was thinking. A similar thing had already happened to Haruka once before. Instead of getting closer, he had distanced himself from her. Quickly sweeping the treats off the table, Kaido wondered why he had become an explorer in the first place, and decided that he needed to change. After finishing the meal, the boy reported that everything had been delicious, and thanked Sylphie for always worrying about him. The hero said that he was incredibly grateful to the girl for always being able to rely on her. Kaido confessed that he didn't see her as a servant. Sylphie has always been like a goddess to him. The girl held out her palms to him, and Takagi continued that he would like to continue to maintain the same warm and kind relationship. The hero asked Sylphie if he could call her simply Syl. And immediately after saying this he became agitated and added that he wouldn't insist if she didn't like it. The girl, very embarrassed, thanked Kaido for thinking of her, and said that she was very happy from the fact that she had been fortunate enough to meet such a host. Kaido completely melted at those words. The girl was incredibly sweet to him, and she captivated him with her modesty. He repeated in admiration that Sylphie was a real goddess. The girl offered him another cup of tea, and the hero didn't mind. Kaido thought it was difficult for a person to change immediately, but he decided that he would try. Looking up at the sky, the hero noticed that the same dark dot was approaching them. An enormous claw landed on the ground. It was a creature that looked like a giant bat or dragon. It scared the birds out of the trees, and the heroes froze in wonder. An incredible force of air current blew away the table. Kaido asked Sylphie if such things happened often in her world. Sylphie came out of her daze and noticed that the table had been knocked over. The dragon asked if it was possible to have his attention. The friends were shocked that the creature was talking. Kaido tried to ask the servant what they should do, but Sylphie was in shock and did not react. The dragon asked what was wrong with her and already assumed that she was frozen with fear. But Kaido justified her strange state by her shyness. Sylphie had gone completely pale. The hero hoped that the cause of everything was not fear of dragons. Realizing that he could get nothing from the servant, the dragon turned to the eyeball. He offered the choice of slavery or death. Kaido was incredulous. The guy either didn't understand what was required of him or was just pretending, apparently hoping that the situation would resolve itself. The dragon thought that the misunderstanding was due to his haste and apologized. He said that in his former world he had been a king, and if the guy had ever heard of a black tyrant dragon, he was in front of him. Kaido had heard nothing about it and generally thought the creature was talking to himself. The dragon continued. At first, everyone obeyed his words, but after a while, they began to claim their rights and freedom. Unable to tolerate such selfishness as he thought, the monster burned everyone. Kaido could not believe this cruelty. The dragon thought about how to undo what he had done, but all that was left was dust and ashes. So he wanted to start over in this new world. He was fortunate enough to be chosen. He was transported to this world. Even to such a small creature, this world seemed huge, with no end in sight. Therefore, the dragon was on the lookout for slaves who were familiar with the area. Kaido called out to him. The hero looked up at the giant from below and realized the strength of the danger from him. Kaido replied that he would be glad to help, but he himself had only recently appeared in this world. He realized that the dragon was definitely not joking about slaves. The monster thought for a moment. He clarified again that it turns out, Kaido wasn't familiar with the area either. The boy noticed that the creature's tone changed slightly. Suddenly, the dragon said that if they were so useless, it would just burn them and exhaled flames. He said with weariness and sadness that he no longer hoped to find anyone useful, for there was only one unintelligent beast nearby. But the heroes were not touched by the flames. They sat under the protective dome that Sylphie had created. The dragon looked angrily at his failure. The girl was apologizing for making her master worry, and Kaido was coming to his senses at the thought of almost being roasted. He planned to distract the dragon and let Sylphie escape, but the one couldn't leave him behind. Kaido assumed that even if the dragon's flames did hit him, that body would disappear and he would go straight back to his own. But the servant said that it couldn't be done that way. She explained that even though the real body would not be affected, he would still feel all the pain and suffering of death. The girl could not let her master go through something like that. Sylphie apologized for not being able to honorably serve Kaido, and after all, he had come all this way. Putting her hands to her eyeball, she promised to return it safely. He was worried because Sylphie was staying with the dragon who had destroyed an entire country. The boy woke up. He was already on the floor of his own room. Immediately picking up the map, the hero tried to summon Sylphie. The light by the map was gone. Kaido wasn't sure if the girl was alright. The dragon, laughing, asked why Sylphie didn't run away, and suggested that she might have been familiar with the area. The monster asked if the girl would become his slave. Sylphie thought only that her tea party with her master had been destroyed. The dragon realized that she thought the situation was unfair, but he didn't care. He recalled that the world didn't actually revolve around the girl. The monster stated that if she hadn't realized yet, she had a new lord of this world in front of her. In his opinion, today was going to go down in the new history of the world, so he thought it was strange to engage in a silly tea party on such a momentous day. Thinking about this fact, he became even more irritated and wanted to sizzle everything. But then the dragon remembered that Sylphie was able to block his first attack, and therefore his fire was useless. Here it seemed to him that the girl was not listening, and then began to threaten that it would be very bad, for the Black Tyrant Dragon was getting serious. Sylphie started by summoning the Divine Hammer. She smiled and said that the conversation was over and the monster should have withdrawn. No sooner had the girl finished saying that she would spare it if it flew away now than the dragon swished its tail. It struck the ground and space was enveloped in a great cloud of dust. The dragon was surprised, but the lightning was still useless against him. Sylphie took off. She summoned a magic weapon. With the Rajneet spear, the girl was going to send the dragon back. Sylphie flew higher into the sky and directed a very powerful discharge from the spear. The dragon, though praised for what he called a small thing, merely felt something pinching himself. The servant was taken aback by this. The dragon's attack was quite powerful. Huge rocks and boulders flew at Sylphie, but the girl was calm. She summoned the protective dome of the Fortress of the Maiden and had no doubts about its reliability. But the monster had a great resistance to lightning and therefore was still quite a dangerous opponent. The battlefield had already expanded greatly. Everything was enveloped in a giant cloud of dust and smoke. The forest was burning. The dragon was laughing. Sylphie was in the hearth itself. The girl stood under the dome and pondered her next steps. She noticed that her flames failed to do any damage to the dragon. It looked like no one would come out victorious in this battle. The monster noticed that while Sylphie was defending herself from his flames, she was standing still. It was likely that this was a limitation of her defense. The servant thought about how she had underestimated the dragon. Sylphie decided to use the analysis skill. A shining lens with an eye symbol appeared near the girl's pupil. Through this lens, Sylphie looked at the dragon and could see its characteristics. The girl appreciated the monster's arrogance. Although its basic characteristics were quite high, calling itself a king while doing so was too much. But Sylphie couldn't understand how it had such a high resistance to lightning. Her gaze fell on her stomach, and a human bracelet was found stuck in it. The rank of this bracelet was only slightly short of a divine artifact. Now the reason for the abnormal lightning resistance value had been found. Sylphie imagined that a group of people were fighting a dragon. Those who decided to challenge it ended up losing, and that bracelet simply couldn't digest in the monster's stomach. The dragon, proudly tilting his head, said that lightning against him must be useless because of some special characteristic of his. It became clear that he was taking credit for it. The monster, having concluded that Sylphie's lightning and his flames were useless, offered to compete in brute strength. He admitted that he was even sorry to kill the girl. In his opinion, Sylphie was much more useful than that runaway coward. The dragon confirmed that it was about that eyeball that was next to her. The monster asked if it wasn't logical to call him a coward since he had abandoned her and ran away. Although all the, as he put it, minnows were pathetic cowards to him because they first pretended to be brave and courageous and then ran away. He noticed Sylphie's displeasure and asked why the girl was hurt by his words, for though she was a minnow, she was strong. And the matter was, of course, an insult to the master. The angry girl screamed how he could call her master a coward. The dragon opened its maw and flames of incredible power burst from it. It stretched for many kilometers. Suddenly, the monster exclaimed and admitted that it was an accident. He concluded that he had caught the girl by surprise. And he was even upset, because he was so eager to make her a slave. But then he decided that this was the way to destroy the disobedient and laughed evilly. Suddenly, he heard Sylphie shouting out demanding that the monster take back his words. A powerful column of smoke rose up. The dragon was perplexed. He was blinded by a very bright stream of light. The monster tried to realize what was happening. Suddenly he saw in front of him what he assumed was a rock. But it wasn't a rock. In front of him sat a giant goddess. The dragon was stunned and unwilling to accept reality. He was furious that the girl had been deceiving him all this time and only pretended to be a trifle. The goddess raised her huge hand upwards. Addressing the dragon like a small lizard, she asked what kind of nonsense he was saying. The dragon was outraged at this treatment of himself. The girl plunged her hand into the ground. The beasts in the forest stirred, sensing what was happening. Sylphie was already plunging her other hand in and grabbing the dragon along with the ground. She replied that she had not deceived the dragon and had now assumed her true form. But more important to her was to punish the offending master. Sylphie picked up the monster along with the earth, and it was already sinking into the ground. The goddess demanded that the dragon take back his words and ask for forgiveness. He lamented that the mere words of the girl were causing him the most intense pressure. It seemed to him that with her voice alone she was capable of killing him. The terrified black dragon could not believe that this was happening to him. Sylphie bowed her head to him and asked one last time if he chose to be crushed or take back his words and disappear from sight. He dragon sank down and was unable to utter anything. Still he capitulated and apologized. Sylphie stood in front of Kaido and apologized for not immediately contacting him. She surmised that she had been unable to do so because the card's force field had been disrupted because she had used her power. Kaido still couldn't sleep last night because he kept worrying about the girl. But the next day, he managed to summon her. The hero said that he was just very happy that she was fine. Sylphie decided to explain herself about the dragon. She said that it happened very rarely and most of the time Erdgar was peaceful. The servant began to blame herself again and felt that she should henceforth refrain from summoning Kaido to Erdgar using the map. The lad asked if she would not invite him to tea again, and confessed that he had enjoyed it very much. Sylphie was surprised and embarrassed. The characters joyful and happy held hands and ran through the dungeon. Thanks to Sylphie's good mood and her hard work, they managed to set a new record of 20 goblin heads in a day. But because of her exorbitant enthusiasm, she often didn't restrain her strength, and so she burned 16 monster cores. Kaido got a call from the gun shop, so he stopped by after school. The shopkeeper handed him a new tungsten staff. The boy took the staff in his hands and looked at it confusedly. He certainly wanted a new one, for the last one had melted. But the hero doubted he would have enough money to buy one. The man announced that he would give the second one for half the price of 100,000, but immediately stipulated that he only wished he could say so. And turning his back to the guy, showing off his muscles, he said that he was giving him the staff for free this time under the guarantee from the guild. Kaido couldn't believe the reality of those words. The man said that there was originally no guarantee on the weapon and it was only because the hero had brought the remains of the past staff. Kaido shrieked with joy. But the owner warned that there were no more such staffs, so this one Kaido should take care. The boy gazed admiringly at the staff. It was compensation for a tungsten staff melted by a golden slime. The man noticed that a slime that could melt a staff made of superior tungsten must be a rare monster. He wondered if anything had fallen out of it. Kaido hesitated, not knowing what to answer. And the host immediately came up with a version of his own for the guy. He assumed that the slime had escaped and scolded the hero for not heeding the advice to exercise his lower body muscles. Kaido Deal pretended that's what happened. He was thinking about the fact that no one knew about the demon card he had fallen out with yet. The hero couldn't decide what he should do with the card. If he sold it, he could no longer worry about his finances. But in that case, he wouldn't see the card for the rest of his life. Therefore, Kaido put the matter aside for now. He thought that if he rushed into a decision, it wouldn't lead to anything good. The salesman's voice awakened the guy from his thoughts. It was asking what he was going to buy with the rest of his money. With joyful excitement, Kaido looked at his phone and saw that 118500 yen had been saved. He had been saving up for a new weapon, but since he no longer needed it now, he could turn to his other desires. The shopkeeper seemed to read the guy's mind and informed him that he just had a new arrival. He said he understood the boy's wishes at once and asked him to wait a little. Kaido smiled contentedly and thought in anticipation that he didn't doubt the salesman in the slightest. The man handed him a magnificent pistol-type crossbow. This was exactly the weapon Kaido had expected. The owner took hold of the crossbow, pointed it at the guy, and pretended to shoot. The hero did not understand what the man wanted from him. The salesman sighed and grudgingly rebuked Kaido for not supporting his game. The guy was annoyed by it all. And the shopkeeper continued to express his displeasure at Kaido's lifestyle as a lone explorer, the fact that he had no friends and his muscles were certainly not pumped up. The hero blushed and replied that it didn't matter now. The man hit him on his sorest spot. The salesman was about to explain things plainly to the lonely poor man and told him to listen to him carefully. So he started talking about the crossbow. It turned out that this weapon, although similar to the ones available for regular sale, had a dungeon specification. It was only allowed to be sold to explorers. The crossbow had a range of 10 to 20 meters. Despite being compact, it would be somewhat awkward to use as a primary weapon. The ability to resist monsters in battle depended on the user's BO. Kaido clarified if that meant that BOs could adjust arrows. The man, twirling his mustache, replied that this was the main difference between this weapon and a normal crossbow. That was why it was meant for dungeons. The owner admitted that he himself didn't know how it worked in detail, but it was most likely due to the technology developed by the guild. It was surprising to Kaido that the guild was already capable of doing such a thing as well. The man surmised that perhaps the magic cores and other items that the seekers bring back from the dungeons are being studied and finding technological uses for them. A toy goblin hung on the wall, with arrows placed in the places most effective for firing. The shopkeeper told him that the assassin's skill and the correction effect together gave victory in a single shot. Kaido was shocked. But he didn't know how to make the shot. The shopkeeper asked him to give the weapon to him. Taking hold of the crossbow, he put his index finger on the bowstring and pulled it back. At first, Kaido was pleased at how easy it was. But when he tried to do it himself, he realized that it was still a bit hard. The hero complained to the man that he felt as if his finger would be torn off. And the man laughed. Calling the guy a chicken, he praised him for a good attempt. Kaido was embarrassed. The master pointed to the button located on the handle. Then showed him exactly how to pull the buttstock and how to cock the bowstring. The man added that if it was difficult for the hero to do it with just his hands, he could rest the crossbow on his foot and bend it on both sides. Kaido understood. Then the shopkeeper winked and said that 20 arrows were due as a gift and the hero was charged 100,000. Kaido was delighted and thanked him for his generosity. He was already imagining how easily he and Sylphie would defeat any enemy by combining such a weapon with the impregnable fortress of the maiden. The hero tried the crossbow in operation and noted that he liked everything. The salesman asked if they had a deal, and the lad grinned in response. Kaido pictured in his head the same stupid shooting game where the shopkeeper himself was the victim. He pointed his gun at the man and mimed shooting, but the man pretended not to understand the hero's actions. The guy became embarrassed and asked why the owner did not pretend to shoot him. The man stood calmly, taking his time to answer. And suddenly assumed a pose, showing that with that armor of muscle, he was in no danger. Kaido agreed, but thought only of how happy he was with his new acquisition. Two explorers were running down the third floor of the dungeon. One hurried the other, afraid of missing someone. They followed the target until they lost sight of it. Abashiri Soda and Hayami Ui were stone rank explorers. Abashiri was crushing over the fact that they had lost a rare monster they could only find. And Hayami was panting after running and felt as if she was about to die. After looking around, they noticed a passage. Abasari assumed that the monster ran that way. But Hayami didn't really like the idea of going inside. Two paws appeared out of the darkness. The heroes went in. The girl didn't think it was safe and tried to stop Abasari, but he only called her a coward and went ahead after the rare monster. Their path was blocked by a black dog. Soda excitedly took up his weapon, intending to fight back against the hellhound. But Hayami stopped him. The girl noticed that there was clearly something wrong with the monster. The monster roared. Hayami insisted that it was an unusual hellhound. The eastern entrance of the dungeon. Kaido walked happily with a new tungsten staff in his hands and a crossbow behind his back. It had been a long time since he had gone down to the dungeon, All his free time was spent preparing for exams and practicing with the crossbow. The entrance here is free, so it was crowded. But if you go further in, there are far fewer people. Only the explorers reached here. There was a sign on the wall that said "Welcome to the dungeon." Some people called this place the safe zone. And some called it the secret base. Here every explorer could buy the equipment he needed. There were also places to sleep, bathrooms, a library, and even a church. If a researcher asked the guild for something and they deemed it necessary, funds would be allocated for it. Kaido considered the locker room to be the most valuable place. This was where researchers could leave the most important things. The hero had heard that the best explorers were rewarded with their own room for free. But he remembered his rank and sadly thought that it was unlikely that would ever happen to him. The guy stopped beside the guard. The one greeted him and remarked that he was already starting to worry since Kaido hadn't visited them for a long time. The hero replied that he was busy with business. Takagi was filling out the attendance register. He thought that the name and rank mark should have been enough. The guard repeated what all solo explorers were told and what the guy of course already knew. That Kaido shouldn't have been alone forever and it was much safer to do research with the team. And warned that if he sensed danger, he should let him return at once. Kaido said goodbye to him and thought that after the incident when the goblin had seriously injured him, this guard was starting to worry about him a lot. The guy was heading towards the lift leading to the dungeon gate. Suddenly he was accosted by rescue workers asking him to clear the way. They were carrying the wounded on stretchers and reported that 2 more were on their way. Kaido was confused. He caught a glimpse of the one lying on the stretcher trying to say something and holding out his hand. The wounded needed urgent help. The boy thought he was badly shaken up. The doorman standing nearby told him that the injured had been given first aid using a potion, so their lives were not threatened. Kaido was happy to hear that, but was surprised. He wondered since when did they have a doorman here. After specifying the desired floor, the employee pressed the first button. There was a shorter path on the ground floor, which the researcher could use to get to the 5th floor immediately. But Kaido realized that he was only on the 2nd floor for now and it was useless for him right now. Lowering his gaze, the guy saw the glasses lying on the floor. The hero picked them up and saw that the glasses were scratched. He thought that the thing must have belonged to that guy. The doorman pronounced that it was extremely dangerous to be an explorer. She continued that there are many reckless explorers. The important thing to remember is that anything can happen in a dungeon. And even on the very ground floor, the most important thing to remember is that your safety is paramount. The girl said she would give the safety goggles to that guy. Kaido handed them to her and thanked her. Walking away from the lift, the hero wondered if this girl went with him to give him a lecture. And everyone was worried about him as usual. But Kaido did not deny that indeed he often hesitated and got into dangerous situations. Finally, he reached the eastern entrance to the dungeon. This gate separated our world from the dungeon world. The guy thought about the fact that he needed to keep his cool. It was time to get to the hardest part. We had to open the gate. Explorers always had to do it manually. Kaido opened it with great difficulty. The gate was to prevent the monsters from escaping into our world, but there was no way to use the internet and communication inside the dungeon. The hero took a step down the steps. After descending the stairs, you will find yourself at the departure square. This is the place explorers often used to gather their group. There was a fountain here with a statue of a praying girl. Kaido looked at it and the statue reminded him of an adult Sylphie. The hero couldn't summon a servant near the departure square, so he went further to look for a secluded place. After finding a quiet nook, the boy stopped. Kaido leaned the map against his forehead, stretched out his hand, and called out to Sylphie. A glow appeared. A servant appeared in front of him. 2 weeks had passed since her last summoning. Takagi asked that the girl take care of him today as well. Sylphie puffed up her cheeks resentfully. Sylphie was destroying all the monsters with her fists. Kaido, of course, couldn't do that and used a tungsten staff against the goblins. Past the hero, several monsters were stamped into the wall at once. He irritably asked the girl to leave at least one for him. While Sylphie was listening, a goblin with a club flew at her. The monster hit the girl right in the face. Enraged, she began to strike with even greater speed. But this time she did not follow and received a baton on the head from the goblin standing behind her. The baton broke in half. The monster laughed. The girl jerkily turned around and from her gaze he immediately fell silent. Immediately, all that was left of the goblin were legs sticking out of the ground. Kaido watched in amazement at what was happening. It reminded him of a turn-based combat. It was clear from the look on Sylphie's face that she was really offended. The hero asked if it was because of the violation of his communication. The girl replied that she was not angry with him. Last time their tea party was interrupted by a dragon, so Kaido promised Sylphie that they would arrange a new one. There was even a date set for the meeting. But because of preparing for exams and practicing with the crossbow, the guy had completely forgotten about it. Kaido remembered one of the preparation days. Sylphie had tried to contact him on the appointed day using the card, but the hero had made the fatal mistake of putting the card in his safe that day. The boy sincerely apologized and promised not to make such a mistake again. Kaido wished that Sylphie would smile again and not spoil her pretty face. He even tried to forcibly create something like a smile on her face with his own hands. Kaido noticed how soft her cheeks were. Stretching them in different directions, the hero couldn't believe that with this soft face, she was able to break the walls of the dungeon. Meanwhile, around the corner stood someone's dark figure. The eavesdropper turned out to be Nakota's employee. She recalled Hitsugai's words that Takagi might be hiding something. And so it turned out, there was an unregistered servant beside him. Nakota was content to follow him. This event happened a fortnight ago. Kaido was happily walking out of the gun shop. The owner hoped that the boy would save more money next time. As soon as the hero left the shop, the owner called out to Nakota. She was standing hiding behind a curtain. She came out of hiding and noted that the guy was very happy to receive a new tungsten staff. The shopkeeper confessed that he didn't expect that an ordinary student of a dreadful school could earn more than 100,000 so quickly. Nakota supported him. The girl asked why, if the guy attracted attention, the shopkeeper didn't inform them about him. Kaido walked and thought about his upcoming training with the staff and with the crossbow. The shopkeeper replied that he just didn't know that the hero was being looked after by Miss Hitsugaya. Nakota remembered the amused expression Hitsugaya's face had taken on after she looked up Kaido's shopping history and saw that he was shopping at this gun shop. The owner laughed and wished he had seen the sight. The man thought that if Hitsugaya was looking through the hero's shopping history, she must have seen that he had requested compensation for the tungsten staff. And hence, she was the one who decided to help Kaido. Nakota replied that Hitsugaya is just the head of the administration. She has nothing to do with the insurance department. But the master noted that the employee's strong trait was her ability to circumvent such formalities. The man asked how much longer Nakota was going to hide this fact. At this point, the salesman cooled on the subject. But he said that even though Hitsugaya was saving this boy for something, he would not have high hopes for the hero, for he was still a child. Nakota replied that she would pass on the words to her colleague, and thought to herself with annoyance that apparently the kid was more careful than she thought and didn't talk to this old man about the servant card. Suddenly the man with burning eyes, twirling his mustache, pronounced that it was time to move on to Nakota himself. He asked if the employee had come all this way for a business meeting and if she wanted to make a contract with the guild's money. She was surprised that the boss had a high opinion of her skills, but unlike Hitsugai, she wasn't capable of such a trick. Nakota would quickly be thrown behind bars for it. She suggested to the man that he sell her 2 low-level potions at a high price and bill Hitsugaya rather than the guild. The vendor wondered why she needed them and suspected that the employee was going to go down into the dungeon. The woman saw nothing wrong with it. Nakota stated that she was still a full-fledged researcher. Once again the dungeon. Nakota stood behind the shelter and thought happily about the fact that here she was, after 2 weeks, finally waiting for Kaido. She was very happy that the guy had reappeared. It turned out that it was Hitsugaya who asked her colleague to find out about his servant, and warned her to keep her out of their sight. Sylphie stubbornly said she had no offense. And Nakota, looking at that little girl, was very curious to know how strong she was. Nakota felt that now was the right time and summoned her transformation skill. Gold-ranked Nakota Rin transformed into a strange-looking cat woman wearing a protective respirator. She got down on all fours and crawled to scout out Takagi Kaido's secrets. Her Vanderwall skill allowed her to crawl on walls, and her stealth skill allowed her to remain virtually invisible. When it came to covert operations, Nakota was no match for the gold rank. The Analyze skill allowed her to give detailed information about the chosen target, but its main disadvantage was its small range. Therefore, she needed to get close. But then the employee spotted Sylphie. Their eyes crossed. Kaido wanted to know what had agitated the servant, and Nakota hurried to get away faster. The hero tried to elicit what Sylphie saw there, fearing within himself that it would turn out to be a ghost. But the girl replied that her imagination was merely playing out. Nakoda was hiding around the corner, breathing heavily. She was trying to figure out if Sylphie had seen her after all. The staff member didn't understand how this could have happened, even though it had been a long time since she had last used her skills. Nakoda could calmly decorate a goblin's head with flowers in such a way that he wouldn't even notice it, or steal food straight from the mouth of a hellhound. But to answer herself the question of how this girl could have noticed her, Nakoda could not. A voice was heard from behind her, resenting why there were so many incompetent people in the guild, and why they hadn't organized a shortcut to the 3rd floor. Sylphie and Kaido turned around. A company of several people came out at them. All were wearing masks, with protective elements like knee pads, for example. All in all, the sight was quite unusual. Who were the unknown masked men? Researchers? Kaido asked the servant to stand behind him. One of the strangers asked if the children had decided to play hide and seek here. Then a fat man with a bare torso suddenly remembered Kaido. The boy embarrassedly replied that he hadn't seen him before. He thought he had mistaken him for someone else. The stranger took off his mask and asked if the hero even now couldn't remember him. It was because of Kaido that he was banned from entering the dungeon for a month. And then that very guild fight flashed before the hero. But Kaido continued to hide his eyes and pretend that nothing had happened, at the same time whispering to Sylphie that it was time to get out of here soon. Suddenly one of the company, his fat man called Boss, asked if he knew the guy. When he realized what was going on, the boss of the company said that he had imagined the guy who had started the fight to be tougher. Kaido was upset because he was seen as a bad person. Someone called the hero a brat and also that he was not right in the head. Sylphie gently turned to her host and reminded him that if he was in trouble, shouldn't she have gotten rid of all those people? Kaido replied with a smile that he would sort it out himself. The hero looked at the company and reasoned that they outnumbered and outranked him. But since it was all in conversation so far, it was worth trying to settle this matter peacefully. But if either of them hit Kaido, then things would be bad for them, as Sylphie was unlikely to keep her cool. If such a thing happened, the servant would tear their heads off. The boss asked Kaido if what his colleague said was true. The boy remarked that their boss was pretty scary. Before the hero could utter a word, Sylphie entered the conversation. She claimed that her boss would never do such a thing, and if he continued to insult his master, he would regret. Sylphie looked out from behind Kaido's back with a menacing expression. The boss was looking perplexed at this little girl. He stood there, overwhelmed with feelings. The fat man laughed and asked what was wrong with this girl. Someone in a skull mask said, "How dare a pathetic servant talk to the boss like that?" Immediately, a fist from the boss flew into the first one's face. He realized that it was the fat man who had committed the misdemeanor. The second one was hit by the man in the skull mask. The boss shouted that he had already told the team not to touch the other explorers. The perpetrators apologized. Kaido, stunned, tried to understand what was happening. A girl wearing a white mask with only eye cutouts approached him and apologized for not training their subordinates enough. The hero assured her that it was fine. The girl said that Kaido didn't look like someone who would be the first to start a fight, so it must have been someone on their team who did it. Takagi thought to himself that the situation happened due to his oversight after all, but decided it was better to keep silent about it. The girl noticed the ruined walls and floor. She asked what had happened here. Kaido looked over to Sylphie and replied, smiling, that when they came here, it was already like this. The girl noticed a magical shard in one of the holes and asked why someone would leave it here. She surmised that the person might have been distracted by an urgent matter. After thinking for a bit, the girl asked if the heroes were heading to the 3rd floor. Kaido said that they had never gone down there before. The girl thought again. She was looking at the heroes as if through a magical lens. Suddenly, the boss reported that an unknown dangerous monster had appeared on the 3rd floor. The delinquent fat man and skull sat on their knees and apologized. The boss warned that the heroes had better not go down to the 3rd floor for now. Kaido thanked him for the information. The girl turned to the boss and said that it was already time to go. Suddenly the boss looked at Sylphie and, calling her a little lady, apologized for the trouble they had caused her master. He then shouted for the arseholes to hurry up. The fat man panicked as he tried to find his mask. Kaido looked at Sylphie and was glad that everything had ended peacefully. The girl asked the boss how he rated the hero servant. The man replied that he was interested in her. Around the corner stood Nakoda. The girl admitted that she had even used her analyze skill to check them out. It became clear that Kaido was a stone rank researcher. Nakoda cautiously followed them. As for the servant, the girl thought that she probably had a mediocre status, because when she checked it, it said no data. The boss had his doubts. He remembered that when the girl looked at him, goosebumps ran down his back. Even through the mask, it could be seen that the boss was blushing heavily and embarrassed. Then he collapsed, lamenting how cute Sylphie's angry face was. As they walked along, the boss confessed that he wished he had a servant like that too. Nakoda thought about what was said. She absolutely did not believe the girl's words about Sylphie being a mediocre servant. The staff members speculated that the servant might have had a skill that allowed her to hide her status. And if that was the case, Nakoda wasn't sure if her level of analyze skill would be enough to break through her defenses. A straggling fat man and a skull ran beside the pensive girl with pleas not to leave them. Nakoda was frightened. The fat man looked at the girl he had hurt and knocked over, decided it must have been his imagination, and ran on. Nakoda lay there and thought sadly that although she possessed a gold rank, she was still physically weak. In the distance, a pierced wall could be seen, flooded with light. Kaido and Sylphie stood on the third-floor plateau and admired the scenery. Sylphie noted that the floor was very different from the previous 2 floors. Kaido perceived everything around him as if it were a small world. Bunnies with tiny wings behind them were running along the ground. Sylphie doubted whether everything would definitely be alright, since they had been advised not to go down to the 3rd floor. Kaido explained that it was just a kind attitude. But as a researcher, the hero couldn't ignore the fact that an obscure monster had appeared here. But if Sylphie thought it was a bad idea, they might as well leave. Sylphie was ready for adventure and wouldn't back down. The servant was excited about this floor. And Kaido was glad that her mood was lifted and thought it was worth preparing for their tea party. Then suddenly the guy remembered that they needed to be on their guard and reached into his bag. He held out a pouch to Sylphie. The servant, seeing that they were magic shards, was completely confused. Kaido explained that if it came to a fight, he would count on the girl. That was why he had previously tried to save as much as possible. Normally, Sylphie didn't get that much. But Kaido, laughing, asked her not to hold back. After all, this was a new floor. The hero said that the most important thing for him was for Sylphie to be fed up. At that moment, the girl felt that someone was quickly running towards them. As they got closer, through the large cloud of dust, it became clear that the monster appeared to be a wild boar. A wild boar was running at the heroes at breakneck speed. Sylphie immediately decided to use her divine lightning skill. But Kaido stopped her. He thought that now was the perfect opportunity to use Plan B. The boar kept getting closer, but Kaido was in no hurry to act and waited for the right moment. The time came and Sylphie applied the skill Impregnable Fortress of the Maiden. The boar hit the defense with such force that it flew into the air. Kaido praised the servant for perfect teamwork. The boy looked at the flying beast and opened his mouth in delight. But the boar turned out to be quite snotty and spread its excretions in aerial spins, which flew into Kaido's mouth. The boar collapsed to the ground, and the hero at this time crouched on the ground because he felt sick. Kaido held the magic shard of the wild boar in his hands. It was noticeable that it was much larger than the goblins. The guy thought that it would probably cost more too. So he decided that he would have to find out about it later. Sylphie apologized for accidentally putting away the Fortress of the Maiden ahead of time. But Kaido wasn't angry. After all, it was his fault. The heroes were walking and Takagi suddenly stopped. He saw that the servant was at a considerable distance from him. Sylphie inquired what had happened. But the boy didn't answer and thought to himself whether it seemed to him that the servant was moving away from him or whether it was really. Kaido sniffed at his clothes. He surmised that maybe the reason could be that he smelled bad, since Sylphie was very sensitive to odors. But the girl assured him that he smelled great. Kaido asked why she was breathing through her mouth then, and asked, giggling embarrassedly, if Sylphie really wasn't fooling him, that she come over and hug him. Sylphie didn't hold back and blurted out that she couldn't tell her master that he was a filthy creature. Kaido hesitated. The hero ran towards the girl with shouts but failed to grab her. Both of them laughed. Kaido tried his best to catch the servant, but she deftly dodged. Sylphie's movements resembled the graceful paw of a dancer. The hero jokingly begged the servant to stop being shy and finally embrace him. The girl offered to continue the game. From around the corner, Nakoda was watching the silly pranks. She couldn't understand what the heroes were doing. Sylphie finally asked her master to stop because he was covered in that boar's drool and snot. Kaido was triumphant at being recognized. The ease with which the heroes were able to defeat the wild boar was unexpected to the employee. Nakoda tried to schematize the battle process. She surmised whether it was a shield or a barrier. But nowhere in any of the guild reports did it say so. From this, it could be deduced that Takagi's servant Kaido was of a rare type. Kaido was tired from running and stopped to catch his breath. The boy promised that as soon as he got home, he would take a shower right away. Sylphie directed her gaze in the direction of Nakoda's shelter. The employee was very surprised to be discovered again. Kaido asked the servant if anything had happened, and offered to go on, promising not to try to hug the girl again. The latter agreed. Nakoda realized that she too was being watched. There was a feeling that the servant could get rid of her at any moment. But it made the employee even more curious. Standing on top of a cliff, a dog howled. Kaido heard it and Sylphie apologized for discovering them first. The boy didn't see it as a problem. He remembered Miss Hitsugaya telling him that the strongest monsters on the 3rd floor were wild boars. Therefore, he was sure that ordinary dogs wouldn't even be able to scratch them. A pack of hellhounds were bearing down on the heroes. Kaido prepared for battle and told Sylphie that he was going to use Plan B again. The plan was a one-sided fighting strategy. Sylphie would create an impregnable fortress of the maiden, and the hero would fire a crossbow. Kaido had only been training with the crossbow for a fortnight, so he was still new to it. But his muscles, nervous system, and his BP score allowed him to increase his shooting power. While Sylphie held her breath, the hero quickly reloaded the crossbow. He had no doubt that together, they were capable of defeating anyone. Kaido furiously attacked the dogs with crossbow shots. Sweating and breathing heavily, Kaido convinced himself not to retreat. Abandoned by the enemies, the lad realized the main drawback of the protective dome, which was that the heroes could not pursue them. Kaido was cursing at the dogs for running away. Sylphie figured they just realized they couldn't win. But the guy wasn't happy that it wasn't even attempted. And after all, Kaido had been so hopeful that he could easily make money with a crossbow. What was his training for now? And there were hardly any arrows left. Sylphie suggested just destroying them all with divine lightning. And Kaido now those thoughts seemed like a good idea. But still, the guy decided to try again. Maybe something would work next time. Suddenly, a squeak was heard nearby. The heroes turned round. Standing there looking at them was a cute little puppy. Kaido noticed that he didn't look like a hellhound. Sylphie was absolutely delighted with the white lump.